welcome everyone. I'll say it for the last time, Happy New Year. Welcome in our next episode of KQL Café, January 2026. We're now in our 4th year already, how time goes. And as usual, your hosts, Gianni and myself. And the agenda. First of all, we'll go through some news. Then today we have a guest. Oh, I forgot to add the name on the first slide, but don't worry. Your name, Simon, on the following ones. We have, as usual, some learning KQL. And then last but not least, what did you do with KQL this month? So on the news front, I want to highlight a few cool things that popped up during the last couple of weeks. Definitely take a look at Ian's KQL Toolbox series, where he's basically dissecting things around log volume, find out which event ideas are causing high volume. In fact, I have a practical example here. This week I was working for a customer, and despite the fact that they have a Defender for Identity, which is already, doing a lot of logon events collection. But for some reasons, they still were collecting traditional Windows event logs, and those Windows event logs accounted for roughly €2,000 per month. So if you are suffering from a high Sentinel cost bill, or if you want to find out how and where you could optimize, whether your detection queries are actually leveraging those event ideas, etc., then definitely have a look at Ian's blog posts that he has been sharing since December. And the last one just came out, I believe, yesterday. Then we have an update around ASIM. Gianni, do you want to briefly elaborate on that one?
Yes, so sorry about that. So basically, ASIM is getting improved. It has some new features added, and must say I haven't really prepared this one, Alex.
You didn't do your homework.
Not this one.
Okay.
I thought good. The next one about the old query was mine.
Okay, good. Anyway, Offer has been sharing some updates around the ASIM model. So for those not familiar with it, I try to explain it in simple words. Imagine you have multiple tables with, network data, and rather, doing a lot of joins or unions. The whole idea, or one of the ideas behind using ASIM, is that basically you will just, search for network events, and within the network events, within the function, to call it like that, it basically, joins and normalizes a lot of information. Like, in one table, it's maybe called IP address, and the other table, it's called IPv4 address, etc. I hope I explained that correctly.
Yeah, so that's correct. But I thought you were mentioning more the changes, because there are a little more than 10 schemas in there based on the OSEM model. And nowadays they added more tables in the case of risk inspection fields. There's some in audit events, they added the risk levels. In the HCP, the inspection fields, there are some new fields added, because they started back in the days with version 1.0, and now the latest is usually 1.27 in the case of network session, where they added the destination description and the source description. So it's a really nice field. And the goal of ASIM was to normalize all data. So for instance, if you have firewall logs, it doesn't matter which vendor you have, but the goal is that you build a query on ASIM, and then you get through all the firewall vendors to your Defender data if you ingest it. So it's a really nice way to normalize data, and especially the firewall events, the web events, and user events. Those have a lot of separate parsers, because in the end, each parser is like a KQL query to normalize data. You can edit them yourself. You can update them. You can have internal ones. You can have the standard ones of Microsoft. you can enable them. There's also like 2 tracks on it. You have the ones where you just filter, for instance, on DHCP activity. That's the ASIM one, the IAM one, and you also have the Vim one. And the Vim ones are filtered ones. So then you can maybe search on host name, on URL, on date timestamps to make it smaller. And they did a nice improvement by adding new fields and making it even more useful.
Cool. Thanks for that.
Okay.
And then this one, you prepared?
I took a look at it, but I haven't. Did you prepare it?
No, I'm totally lost of who did what. Good start of the year. No, I can tell. I mean, basically, we now have 2 additional tables for preview. The campaign info, those familiar with Defender for Office 365. And we already have campaign reports since a couple of years. And basically now we can also use advanced counting. So you have, threat actors, all the information that you would typically get into the portal. And you can basically now take a campaign and easily find out, what users are affected, what mail messages, etc. And the file malicious content info, basically, if you have Defender for Office in use, and here let me add as well, because this week I noticed also a misconception, like, this is only about Exchange Online. It is not. So Defender for Office provides way more protection than just Outlook, Exchange Online. It also provides protection for Teams. Safe links works in there. You can report malicious activity in Teams now since a couple of months, like we could do with email. Reports mail. You can also report it now in Teams. Safe links will work there. And also in SharePoint Online and OneDrive. Often people forget to configure that there's also malware scanning running behind there, and you can prevent users from downloading those malware scanned files. And long story short, we now also have in this file malicious content information about those files that were actually processed by Microsoft Defender in SharePoint Online, OneDrive, and Teams, and if there was a detection on them. Good. Then, for those that joined back in November, we had Daniel Moses in our KQL Café, where he talked a lot about Defender for Office as well, but also about all the KQL goodness that he's been working on, and also where the community has been working on. And he just dropped a post recently on LinkedIn, basically announcing that we have now 50 more, which basically means that we now have a total of 260 plus predefined hunting queries directly accessible from the Defender XDR Advanced Hunting portal. So definitely take a look before reinventing the wheel. There's actually a lot of cool queries either prepared by Microsoft as well as by the community. Then, for those dealing with Defender for Endpoint, take a look at the Costa's blog post series. He's diving into Defender for Endpoint, starting, what it actually does, but then it becomes interesting. He's focusing on troubleshooting as well as a nice up-to-date breakdown of all the detection events that Defender for Endpoint does. So, smart screen events, antivirus events, etc., and provides a lot of KQL queries within his blog post. So definitely check that out as well. This is yours.
Yes, this one is definitely mine. So we discussed this. This is of a blog post which made quite a while ago, but it was interesting to share. So basically, if we look at the blog post, it was about partial searches and lookups. So if you open it, then as you can see in the screenshot, I also played around a bit with it. Can actually show it also live on screen. So basically, you go to share this screen. So basically what the blog post is about, to do partial searches, in this case with the MV apply. So MV apply is a way to do sub searches from your queries. So, for instance, above in the lookup line, we define a table, and in the table we have, in this case, usernames, and we also make a list of it. You could also make a set even out of it. So it should be set, because then you have the unique items. So basically, we do a lookup, and then we use that lookup to on the MV apply. So basically, this way we get all security events, do the MV apply lookup, and then we basically match all the lines for accounts that contain any of these. And if we do that, then we can figure out which users are there. So it's nice because also because you have the contains, you have the partial search here, you have admin, you can have administrator, you can have other things. You can also do the same thing for file name. So if you have password, those kinds of things that you can do with the MV apply. So it was quite nice to read the blog post there. It wasn't the newest one, but it was a good read. And I think in one of the future KQL cafes, I will also do a small bit in the learn section about the MV apply.
Good. So, thank you. And with that, we have reached the end of the news. And I'm super pleased to welcome our guest, Simon Scharschinger. So, Simon, stage is yours. Feel free to share your screen.
Yes, I'm going to share my PowerPoint. Do you see the screen?
Definitely.
Yes.
Perfect. So, what I'm going to talk about is our recent customer project we had, which is kind of a tricky one because we had to do time fraud, working time fraud detection. So we get with a compliance agency, they pulled us into the project to help them validate time fraud from some employees to see if they're really working in the hours that they're clocking in that part. So this is basically what I'm going to talk about. Short agenda about me, and then guide you through the architecture. What queries did we use? How did we set up the whole system? It's not only about KQL, it's also about like the other things around and what we learned and what's to come in this year with the project. Just short about me, Simon Scharschinger, living in Germany, a little bit north about Nuremberg. I'm the founder and CEO of Cubic Solutions and Clever Solutions. Cubic Solutions does mainly projects, consultant projects, managed services for security, compliance, device management. We are 4 people now, and we recently launched a new company, Clever Solution, for our SaaS product to harden tenants, Microsoft tenants. We run some frameworks on them. We do 280 checks. We had SPF, DKIM, DMARC frameworks there, visualize some data. I do paragliding. This is where the picture comes from, where I got my license from the paragliding. So I took cloud very seriously. I'm a volunteer firefighter in Wüstenstein, which is my hometown now, husband, and I'm treat butler for our 2 dogs. If you like, just connect with me on LinkedIn. This is the QR code on the top right corner. Basically, the customer had a challenge that they had the feeling that there is a time fraud from some employees. They are clocking more hours than they see work results. So they had the workers' council involved. They had different stages escalated, and now it's basically on the court, and they need to prove something. We have like the user says something. We had the logs, which is here and there. If we just look at a single signal, that would be misleading, and the HR department was not able to do something. What this solution is definitely not about, we do no real-time monitoring, so there's no like look over the shoulder of the users. As you know, we do not make any productivity scoring. We just, if I go through the KQLs later on, we see what we do there. It's not really a behavioral profiling, so we do not detect that, and there's also no automated decision. So as a result, the company do get an CSV report, and then they can interpret the data and match them with their correlation, do the real correlation there. It is super sensitive in Germany to collect such information and to compose such information, like which is the real work begin and the real work end, which is really kind of a legal nightmare potentially. So this is why we had the external lawyer heavily involved into the project. What type of data can we use, and what type of data can we use for the reports, and give it to the HR department. So some principles: we always have to have the purpose. We have data minimization, access control, and retention limits. So whenever there's a report created, it's valid for 3 weeks, and then it's stored in Azure retention and Azure storage with a retention policy. This is basically the high-level architecture. So on the very top, we do have an Azure runbook. I took the wrong icon. It's basically an Azure runbook where the administrator, and this is phase one, it's ugly, but it works. So the administrator have to put in the username, user principal name, and the start and end of the window we are looking at. And then we stored all the KQL queries we need in an Azure storage account. So the Azure runbook pulls out the queries, then it runs the queries against the log analytics workspace, and then store the result into a different Azure storage account where we do have the retention. And then we push the SAS link into the log of the Azure runbook, so the administrator can pull out the SAS link and forward the SAS link to the HR department. Version 1, super ugly. Version 2 is coming this year, and we'll make a Power App around that so that it's user-friendly. What you see in the very bottom is, during the project, it turns out that we do not see enough information. Can you imagine that? We don't see local logon device events and screen lock events, which are not logged with Defender for Endpoint. So the customer is fully within Microsoft environment, has Windows clients, and we do want to track some specific applications, line of business applications, different cloud applications, but we did not see enough data from the local clients. So we installed the Azure monitoring agent on each and every client. We built a data collection rule and pulled the events into log analytics to have them for the KQL queries ready. That's basically the high-level architecture. Any questions so far? Because I can run through this within 5 minutes or 2 hours, depends on the questions.
So you mentioned that despite that they have Defender for Endpoint, you ended up deploying the AMI agent, or did you use a third-party agent?
AMA agent. We use the AMA agent and using a DCR rule.
Okay. Yeah. So you already faced the challenge that, at least that's my latest knowledge, that you can only have, like, say, one scope, right, for all, if these are Windows clients, correct?
Yes, we have one scope, and this is more or less generic device logon events, screen lock events, stuff like that. Events which are not clearly tracked in Defender for Endpoint device timeline, as far as we found it.
Yeah, so basically you are collecting those because of the capping of Defender for Endpoint, or?
Yeah.
Because there are device logon events, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but not the type of when we're looking at to really measure when did the user type in a password and what is a generic. So we had not enough information to be super precise, and this is required in a court situation, and that you have really precise information. So we had not enough, and this is why we decided to pull in more events from that end.
Okay. Yeah.
We just used Intune. We used Robopack as a packaging tool. We just dropped in AMA agent, pushed it out to all clients. A client is connected automatically into the tenant and collects the DCR, which was a huge learning from my end. How technically an intra-joint device is authenticating against Azure to see what DCR is to apply and whatnot, was a huge learning on my end.
Okay. Yeah. Good. And is that a lot of log volume that you get now from those clients, or have you been very selective with just what you need for this purpose?
Yeah, we've been super selective with an XPath query to select only specific events that were not already there. So it's like a long XPath query for them. I do not have them handy, but I can put it in the show notes after that and a summary statement for those who are interested. And basically, we just made sure to have only those specific events which are not already collected in Defender for Endpoint timeline logs.
Yeah, yeah. And I assume you store them in a dedicated log analytics workspace and not in the one that you would use for Defender Sentinel, correct?
We used one workspace. We give the customer the option to use both. And the customer came to the decision because it's a different table. It's fine to have them in the same workspace. And it's, I don't know, the company has, 50 people, so not that much.
Oh, okay.
It's just two IT people, CEO and some person who has to do the IT, basically. Mm-hmm. So not that huge environment.
Okay. Yeah.
Let's go through the queries. We do have 4, and then we go through the queries and we run it in our test environment or in our productive environment with a limited resultant set. We do have the device timeline, basically, when does the device start, fall asleep, log on, lock screen, such information. So basically hardcore on the devices. We do have Entra ID and VPN signals, like anything where users log in from the cloud and stuff like that. We do have the line of business application, like process execution on the device itself. And we do have SaaS app usage. And as it's a SaaS, we limited, or the customer want to have only logins from corporate devices. So we pulled in device identity to itself. Device timeline, it's about like human device interactions, logging in interactively on the device itself, shutting down the device, such informations. We have workday boundaries, basically. Usually a person logs in the morning and logs out in the afternoon. Maybe there's on the lunchtime, you log off or shut down or reboot, stuff like this, for Windows updates, stuff like that. And this is the sources we're going to use for the queries. First assumption was first log on, first log off, last log off. Basically, the time in between is working time. That's wrong, guys. That's not what the work duration is, because somebody starts a device. There are different apps around the world that imitates mouse cursor movements and also team status, stuff like that. We also had Teams meeting joins with apps with an avatar. Super crazy shit out there. Okay. Yeah, people put a lot of efforts to be not at work, but look like they are at work. This is in this project we really learned about the bad people in the working environment, not like hackers and white hat hackers, but who want to damage the employer. And they put a lot of effort to get that. And we always in every meeting we said, yeah, why did you spend that much effort on building a workaround instead of just working? It would be the same effort, basically. Mm-hmm. Entra ID signals, basically like, whatever you can see in Entra, log on at cloud authentication. And we already do validation across the device activity assumptions. We had cross-reference with the Entra ID sign-ins, sign-in logs, VPNs. The customer has a VPN solution. The egress data on some Azure VMs. They do have, I'm not sure, Windows 365 or AVD. So in some solution, they have an Azure egress IP or also logins into Exchange Online from a Microsoft data center IP, which is not a real user login, so we have to filter that out. So that was the thing. The local app usage, work-related app process. So we get a list of 3 or 4 local apps. One part was developers, because developers use AI nowadays. They do 1 hour wipe coding and they clock 8 hours of work. That's not basically what an employer wants to have. So we look for how often does the process start, when does the process begin, when does the process terminate, and other applications on the client, whether really interact. Is this for me, Gianni? I'm not sure.
No, it was for Jay.
Okay.
You're already sharing scripts to stay alive.
Basically, if you don't want your teams to go in away mode, you can start PowerPoint in presenter mode, and then you will stay green.
Yeah, such things. We also identified somebody who just relaunched the Edge browser, with MSN as the website, because then you have an interactive logon on the Bing search, and you have a process executed. So that's with a sign-in profile, you have just a scheduled task that launches Edge browser every 45 minutes. The fourth part is SaaS and Office activity, basically SaaS authentication and heavily cross-referencing, cross-validating, doing such information. Why did we do automation at all? Because super huge queries, you have to fill in some parameters. We do have different KQL queries. We need to align them. We run multiple times in the issue where the KQL query was too long. So we got the prompt that we cannot run the KQL query because it has too many characters. So we split it into 4 different queries to aggregate the information, put it together, and be reproducible. Also like error handling and stuff like that to make it a little bit more user-friendly. And the important thing to have a consistent output for the HR department. So now they get every time a CSV report with all the information we do have, and then they can map it with their timestamps on the employees. Blob storage. So we do have containers in the storage account. We do have SAS link with an expiration, and we have an enforced retention policy on the storage account so that there is no sensitive information stored longer than needed. Right now, we do have no mails and no attachments floating around, so there's the risk eliminated that you send a CSV report round and round, so the information will never get deleted. And right now, it's just in the log, in the runbook, the SAS URL, which then is basically forwarded via Teams or mailed to the HR department. And this is the thing we're going to change in the next year. Phase 2, as I mentioned already, it's ugly. It's a runbook. Somebody has to log in into Azure, start a runbook, fill in the parameters. We planning to build a Power App around that and to have like the traceability, who has requested what, when it was generated, who has it gotten, who's the mail, who has access to information, such information to have like trace the sensitive information, because it's super sensitive, at least in Germany, I guess in other countries as well, to collect such information. Yeah, that's basically it. I'm coming to the closing, but we switch over to the demo and run some examples on that. We had different learnings. Technical lessons is KQL costs a lot on resources and nerves, basically, when you do such a lot of information, but I don't tell you anything new. If we put just a single source, it's like in Sentinel, you have to correlate more and more signals to get the thing. Time normalization, because different logs have different timestamps and different UTC or localized timestamps. In the organization, we identified that we have to have a training session for the HR department to help them understand the report, because just the timestamp beginning and end is not really what we have there. There's space for interpretation, and we just help them doing that. Access boundaries, not everybody's allowed to get the link. This is basically organizational, and we have to document it each and everywhere. And this is why we have this 6I principle right now on our organizational procedure. We have the HR department who can raise the request and the IT guy who can do the request. And then they get the log, what it runs. The last 2 parts is basically like what we've learned as human. Technology reveals patterns, but human decide what it means if there's a pattern. So this is basically like from the human factor, what is important from our end. If there's a question on the presentation, I would jump into our productive environment to showcase the 4 KQL queries.
Yeah, have you thought of, and this just comes to my mind, let me give you some context. So last week we were at the Yellow Hat event, and there was a CTF going on there, and one of my colleagues actually, basically on purpose made use of AI to solve some of the problem statements there. And of course, that defeats the purpose of a CTF, which is basically, to learn about security. But he was super amazing. And when he told me the results and shared them with me, I was as well, how fast with nowadays capabilities, it was able just by entering some prompts and asking some questions to basically go to the data itself. So my question is, have you considered, or is that something you're looking at, to also bring in AI technology, to call it very generic like that, to help with the interpretation of all the logs?
Yeah, my problem with AI and huge data sets is basically AI is for me then the large language model where I can ask my question, transfer it into machine readable text, and then it's just big data analysis and statistics, where it's not really AI, but it's just like big data analysis or machine learning on big data. But yeah, we definitely tried to look into it during the project, but there was a little bit of a time pressure because of the ongoing court case. For sure, we do, as we all do, some wipe codings on the KQL queries because the 200 lines, something like that, to get all the information together and to collect all the logs. So we use AI for the project. Coming to a question, this is one of the things we're gonna want to have in the Power App framework to help with the interpretation, to receive the CSV and then map it together, because we don't have the timestamps what employee clock on the system to put them together and match them. We just see our information, what we have from as technical signals. What I'm love to see, and it's a difficult one to see, like evidence on the really first timestamp. So what's the evidence score? Like 90% sure that this was the first event on a day, or 20% sure it was the first event. Even it would already help the HR department to interpret the information. But yeah, I absolutely agree. We have to look into this AI buzzwords for our solution to help with that.
Or, just comes to my mind, but I'm a little bit biased because that's currently my focus topic. Look at an MCP server, like we now have for Azure Data Lake and well was Sentinel, to basically reason over the data. I'm not per se advocating that we should blindly trust the results, as this is also a very human thing, right? I mean, this in the end, a wrong interpretation could also have a negative impact on a human being based on what you're doing here. Yeah.
Especially in this case when it's about time frauds. What is your experience with an MCP on Azure Lakes with many different tables?
To be honest, I just spent the last 2-3 weeks with it, but I'm positively surprised. But it's more that I like this approach because if you have a KQL query, you run it, and then you iterate over the data, and then suddenly something catches your eye, right? Now, what would you do before all this new technology? You would then start digging into that and create another query. And,
down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, and you spend a lot of time. But now, if something catches my eye, you can just say, "Hey, can you please zoom in on that?" And I have to say, I'm quite positive about the way how it does the calls and how it retrieves the data. Of course, in that moment, I'm more interested in the data I get rather than whether that is now the perfect graph request or KQL query that he submitted, as long as the data is there. Of course, this doesn't mean, we discussed it yesterday evening with Gianni, it doesn't mean that we have to stop learning KQL because we now, all have MCP. I would still advocate, it's good that we know the toolings. It's the same for wipe coding, right? Yeah, vibe coding is somehow cool. I have my opinion on it. I just hope that I will never sit in a plane or sit on a train or whatever where, the brakes and the control systems were just vibe coded and nobody actually understands the code. Yeah. But yeah, that's for another discussion. Yeah. Cool.
I sort of agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just imagine Deutsche Bahn doing live coding for their train calculations. Let's jump over to the KQL queries, what we did so far. So this is my colleague, Alexander Schirmer, who built the solution with the customer. We have to fill in those parameters. So what is the time set? I'm just showing this for the sake of this demo. So we cannot see all the information because we don't have all the local applications there and all the AMA agents deployed. But basically, the HR department would put in the start and the end of the suspected time window, put in the user principal name, and we do them things like getting the onboarded devices on Defender for Endpoint. And what we had to do is using this materialize on each inquiry, while we create subqueries to increase performance, because otherwise we would always get the error like exceeding memory or exceeding usage on KQL. Then we built time windows and we built PC starts per day per device. We built process events, what we see on an hourly base per hour. Defender process aggregated, which is going on. We look for the network events. We look for network events coming from the user's account. So we are aggregating all the information that we can get from different tables from the device, mapping it per device, logging it together, logging the sign-ins on the user via the sign logs. And then we have the intra-device check-ins per day. So where we can see intra sign-in logs on different things from this particular device. As I mentioned, one limited factor was that they are only interested from actions from a corporate device. So no bring your own device or no private use scenarios here. Interactive and non-interactive, device local log on, log off from there, from the security events, which coming from the AMA agent from the device. We do have different event IDs, which we are collecting. And then we build the device keys. And then basically this one is the big one where we make the summarization. And then we build some buckets to get this list of information. Is it large enough?
Well, it shows the complexity.
Yeah.
I've just one question. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of codes and line. I mean, you are executing this out of a log analytics workspace, right? Have you also now built some functions, or is basically all the code in here?
The KQL query as such is stored in Azure SQL. Not in Azure SQL, sorry, in an Azure storage account.
Yeah.
And then we use the Azure function to get this text block. And then we're going to use the PowerShell to invoke the KQL query to log on X workspace.
Okay. Yeah.
So like
but you haven't stored any functions to maybe
No.
Yeah. Okay.
We
So
use
basically
the
the entire
invoke
code is in one KQL query. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we use the invoke AC operational insight query to execute the KQL query against the log on X workspace, where we connect with a managed identity so that there's no password floating around for that. And so we have a centralized solution where we can improve the KQL queries to get all the information. And that's basically all the information. As we can see here is for Alexander, we have per day, and we have row, and we do see like the local time to see what's the current date, the principal account name, the first device scene, the device name, Defender ID, such information. And then we do have maybe 13th is not a good one. Let me put yesterday. First scene 0.15, last scene in the afternoon. I guess he's not using it. Device first logon time, 7 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock. He lives in Sweden. First sign-in detected to some applications, which is pretty much this one, as we do see the sign-in logs. Non-interactive, for sure he has a mobile phone, so this is not really relevant. So we do get timestamps per first non-interactive sign-in activity, device logon, such information we do get there. Similar complex query runs for the Entra stuff. We do have different logins. Windows logon IP, Windows logon source, which is login IP. As the customer has a VPN solution in place, we also detect the IP switch. So is the user coming from multiple IPs from the VPN without VPN, stuff like that. We do have corporate IPs, which is different than VPN IPs, and see if the user travels home at lunch and then clocking 8 hours on-site work. So we do see such information as well for the username to work with that. Entra logon and many other information on that. We would see like Azure egress IPs as well, as we do not have in our productive environment at Cubic Solutions. This is basically empty, but we would have VPN first and last, VPN connection source as information, and if there's an IP switch. I guess LOB app usage and SAS, I cannot show it to you because we don't have the local device information for process events and other events. But same methodology in the background. We would build such information of a set of information, and then we're going to pull this into the runbook, collect the information, and put this together as an information to the HR department. And we do some calculations on the duration, basically. So if we see from here to there, which is, I don't know, 23 hours and 15 minutes in between those two timestamps, we would basically make a duration calculation for the HR department to see if it's longer what we see or if it's shorter what would they have in their environment. That's basically it. What we do there, as you can see, every KQL query is, I don't know, over 200 lines to collect all the different tables, correlate the information, make sure that what is the really first event and what is the really last event, and do we have gaps in between of multiple hours? So when does a working day start? So if somebody starts at 10 p.m. and works to 6 in the morning, you cannot use like the midnight as a selector of a day. So you have to look around from the different angles. What is a working day and whatnot? In most cases, as the customer is an insurance company and they are based in Germany with 50 people, so normal business working hours in Germany, like 9 to 5, which is pretty normal, but you have some olds as developers which are working at the night. Any questions so far? I'm going to put all the KQL queries. I'm going to send it over to you, all the KQL queries, so that you can put it hopefully somewhere in the show notes as an attachment with the placeholders and all the other personal information PIIs. I'm going to remove that and send it over to you so that you have handy with you and the show notes.
Definitely, I can imagine quite some, in English, well, considering all the time conversions that you had to make, normalize them. It's definitely interesting. Never seen so.
We did have some issues with people working on a vacation. So working on a vacation in a different time zone. And to make this readable, we introduced this time zone offset thing to help the HR department mapping it to the time zone, because they clock their hours on the local time in, I don't know, Malaysia forever, as an example, which is a totally different time zone, to map it to the clocked hours to help them with that.
Crazy.
I learned the first time about Materialize.
It's
Never
basically
heard of that from before.
It's like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's basically like if you use the data multiple times, you basically load it into memory.
Yeah. So like if you have corp devices here, now you can reuse corp devices as the result, and if you do not use Materialize, it would execute the query every time.
Very cool. Yeah, but I guess also very fragile, right? If you have so many lines of code, if somewhere things are changing in a table or etc. Have you come across this, like schema changes that you didn't expect or that were happening?
Not yet, as the project is only 3 months old.
Mm-hmm.
So there was not a major schema change on the Microsoft side so far, I would say. I guess it's about to come, but not yet. The question is, how would I avoid this?
Yeah.
This is, even with a function to reuse functions, it still would be very fragile because we need to correlate as much information as possible. And if you use many tables, you have many different options for Microsoft to change the schema.
Cool. So in the end, how many modules did you end up like this? You say you specify the time at the beginning and then you run them all.
What do you mean with modules?
Or how many different scripts? You mentioned you have one for signing logs.
Those four. Four. Device, Intra, one of business applications on the client, and SaaS applications.
Okay. Yeah.
Those 4 scripts are there. And then we just run them, get from each and every script such a table as a result. And then we do the latest merging of the information into a single CSV on the runbook. And then the runbooks create a CSV report, puts it in the storage account, and creates a SAS link.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, definitely the most special use case, if I have to bring it into the context of KQL, I've heard how it's being used. But yeah, cool. I mean, it's sad on the one hand. This is what bothers me a little bit, that we have to come so far that we end up building such a solution because we don't trust our employees. I'm happy I don't have to do so with ours. But yeah, definitely cool. And I think I'm pretty sure that there's some goodness in your KQL queries if you want to make available. Definitely cool. Yeah.
Yeah, there was the human factor in the project was really like a small piece, a small path, I would say. Because on the one hand, you would like to trust your employees, and you have to trust your employees to a certain degree. But once you have the evidence or complaints from colleagues about a specific employee that he's not working, you have to act on it. And this is basically, they were the hour of birth of this project. They got evidence, kind of evidence that the employee was not working that much as they clocked. So they trust the employees, but once you have evidence and complaints from colleagues, I guess as an employer, you have to act at the latest.
I could think of, if you are open sourcing this, that it can also be very useful for security, incident analysis. If you know that an account was compromised, but I wasn't there actually in the company, so if I now want to have a clear timeline of what my specific account has been doing, where it has been doing stuff, I see a little bit in that context.
That will bring the solution to the next level. Because how would we know from the usage, purely account usage, like an interactive sign into Office online, if it's a hijacked one or is it a productive one? So that's basically the tricky one, because you can say I wasn't working but how would we know that it was not you? That's basically, if it's a different IP, but we already have those signals. But I agree with you, that will bring the solution to totally next level.
Yeah. And there are tons of things you can imagine in this context. Once we were discussing to maybe correlate Wi-Fi logins to locations. But
now it's a Teams feature.
But in the end, it's a bit, in the Netherlands, it was quite hard to pull off because it's invading too much privacy. Because if you think of that context and you're looking in KQL, seeing, hey, who is logging where, to which domain controller, where is his phone connected to, you can do a lot of privacy invasive things. So in the end, we couldn't build anything on that. But in this case, if you need to prove things, then yeah, it makes sense. But as you can imagine, you can build really nice things. Just only if you just look at the Defender Windows logins against locations.
It
can be fun.
You see a lot of information. The question is, do you want to correlate them? That's basically the tricky one. But this is with the lawyers, I would say. Yeah, that's basically it. We learned a lot, especially as this one was a small path between being illegal or being invading the personal space, or what is required for the court case.
Yeah. Okay, and if I may ask, did it help at the court in the end?
It helped, but I do not know any resolution. I know that the lawyer was happy that now he has some data.
Okay.
That's. I'm not sure if this is positive or negative, but he's happy. So.
Okay. Good. Yeah. Thanks. I'm still a little bit dizzy. Like, wow, I wouldn't have expected to see KQL indirectly being used like that. But yeah, thanks a lot for your presentation and also your willingness to share this, let's call it, delicate or sensitive topic. Yeah. Yeah, if no one, I see a couple of things going on in the chat. Did you check that, Gianni? Oh no, it's this bot thing. Yeah.
Our facilitator.
Our facilitator. Okay.
Facilitator.
Yeah, good. Okay, if no one has anything else or any questions to Simon, then I would flip back. Basically, no, it's actually your slide, Gianni. So thanks a lot, Simon, for sharing.
You're welcome.
Of course, you're welcome to stay until the end. And for everyone else, we'll share the details in the show notes when I have them ready. Yeah. Good.
So back to me. Like Alex said, thank you for joining us, Simon.
Sure.
And let's move on. So basically, every month I try to explain something, and one of the things I want to do this month is like a really simple one, a max of, which is also an operator, as you can imagine, to take the highest number of both. Or in this case, I'm comparing something. So let me just share my other screen for a second. We go to here, share this window. So basically, one of the things I was working on was a query. I'm building a dashboard for some information collection about also Sentinel usage and ingestion and stuff. And one of the things was I wanted to have some limits. So for instance, I have this query where I collect the benefits and basically the usage compared to the benefits used, because those are all getting logged. But like I said, still work in progress. But for now, we're going down to this little guy over here, the max of. So basically, you can have multiple values in there. In this case, what I can do, I want to have the highest number of billable bytes minus the coalesced data lake bytes minus this benefit bytes. So basically, up above, I do the billable bytes, and then I say a coalesce between data lake bytes and 0, and then also minus a coalesce between benefits bytes and 0. And this has a value, and if it's higher than this value, I can find it with the max of. I could also replace this coalesce with max of, because I just want to have the highest number between both of them. And it can also be useful if you want to compare two values that you don't have to do an if statement or something. It's a quite simple but effective way to find the highest number between several values. I think this was the quick one. Any questions about this? It's not good. Then let's continue. So basically, after this one, I wanted to share my query for what did you do with KQL this month? And basically, in this screen, also what I've been doing. Like I said, I'm working on a dashboard to better understand ingestion. And one of the things is that there are two benefits in Microsoft Sentinel. There's the Defender P2 grant, and there's the Microsoft M5, A5, E5, however you want to call it, grant. So basically, for each Defender P2, so Defender for Cloud Server P2 license, you get 500 megabytes a day. So basically, what I wanted to do is to get the Azure Resource Graph to tell me, hey, how many virtual machines do I have in my tenant and how many of them have the P2 grant? So basically, what I did was first use the security resources from the Azure Resource Graph and then query for where the type is pricings, because anything to do with related with pricings, virtual machines, so that I know that in that specific bit, it's anything related to virtual machines. And then I set basically the pricing tier standard and the plan to P2. So basically, this returns all the subscriptions that are configured with the Defender for Cloud P2 plan. So next, I want to... Yeah?
Something just rings a bell, because I think it's technically possible to also assign a different license on a per resource level. Isn't that the case?
Yes. Then you have to find them from the license part in Entra or in the 365 admin portal.
No, I thought that even through API, but it might be, I wouldn't know who would do that, but I thought it's possible through Graph. So instead of setting this, Defender for Cloud policy where you basically define P1 or 2, that you can also set this instead, if in that subscription you have a resource group. And I even thought on the server level itself, but I'm not 100% sure. But
yes, it's an option, of course. So if you want to be really nitty gritty, what you can also do is run a daily PowerShell. So if you run a daily PowerShell script to collect that data for the other licenses, because in the graph you have it's called subscription or license SQ. Mm-hmm. And then you can write it to a watch list, and then you can collect the watch list and then combine it with this. But then, you have to set up some extra pieces in there.
Talking virtual machines, properties, pricing tier.
Okay. So this gets all the subscriptions where you have the P2. And then from there, we collect the resources. So basically, we're telling the resource graph, hey, we want to have all components in the resource graph. Filter it back to subscription ID. And then we want two types. We have the virtual machines and we have the machines. One is related to Arc onboarded devices, so on-premises devices, and the other is Azure backend. And basically also filter it here. So basically OS is this value, so property source profile OS disk, because OS disk is something in Azure. And in on-premises for Arc, we have the OS name. So basically, because you won't onboard your Azure machines in Arc because they're already managed, so that way you can also pick between which systems you have where. Mm-hmm. Then I go back where I say, hey, OS type is this. I didn't include it here. But you can also imagine that maybe you have some older servers and some newer servers. And if you want to use this query specifically to figure out which OSs you are running where, then you can also use the OS type in this case to find out which OS you're running. But for now, what I did is I did a total account and I did the virtual machines and the machines to count them as Azure VMs or Arc servers and then have them here.
Yeah, and maybe you want to share with the audience, why you actually got down this rabbit hole. So maybe to recap let's quickly forget about the E5 benefit. So like Gianni said, guys, you get 500 MB per day, which is a free ground if you are on the P2 plan for Defender for servers. So if you have let's keep it simple, 10 servers, right, you would have 5 gig free per day. Now, if you're collecting more than 500 MB per day, at the very end of the month, you have that bill, and you ideally, and that's what I had a few discussions, and also we're hanging our heads against the wall with Gianni, because according to the numbers and the bills that we saw, it didn't always, make it up to the number, because we were expecting a higher, let's call it, discount based on the pure number of P2 licensed servers than that we could see. And well, maybe we took it wrong, but I think now you have come to the bottom of it, right, Gianni?
Yeah, so this is indeed a good way to figure it out. And also, if you take this a step further, because now hey, we have, 15 licenses, you can do maybe 2 things. Figure out, hey, we ingest only 10 gigabytes of security events, and we have 50 licenses, so it might not make sense to run P2, because in the end, the difference between Defender P1, P2 is basically for the P2, you get free ingest and you get some vulnerability management, just-in-time access, all the things that are happening in the Azure cloud. But then if your systems aren't in the Azure cloud, then you can also use P1, because they don't have any other features except for the 500 megabytes a day free grant. So then you can figure out, hey, maybe I have 4 VMs in Azure. So 4 VMs, that's 15 gigabytes a day, a month. It's 60 gigabytes a month for 4 VMs. If my security events are lower than 60 gigabytes, then I can also maybe downgrade my on-premises servers from P2 to P1. But that's a bit how you can play with it. Or you can say, hey, we ingest 120 gigabytes, which means I need 8 servers. It's a bit playing around.
Yeah, I look forward when your workbook is going to be finished. Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool.
I'm going to give it back to you for the certificate fun.
Yeah, exactly. That was indeed fun. Although, the story itself is no longer interesting. But yeah, Defender for Endpoint certificates. There was a message center announcement around Intra ID Connect, where we had to make sure that those systems actually have the right and the latest and greatest DigiCert certificate in place. So I thought that's maybe a good idea to go back to this certificate info, because that information is available in Defender for Endpoint, provided that you have the TVM add-on licensing, which of course not everybody has. So let me quickly share my screen. I hope that's the correct one. And there we go. So what I do here, and maybe you can reuse the query again if you have this vulnerability management add-on. Basically, what I wanted to know is to verify whether all the systems do have that certificate properly installed to all the clients. And in my first attempt, I was just like, okay, find all devices with and without, right? Because my first query just with didn't really make sense, because knowing this customer environment quite well, I knew the number that I got returned doesn't add up to the total amount of endpoints in this case. So I said, please give me everything. And what's maybe also important to highlight here is that in this case, the issue 2 common name. So first, I totally got it wrong. So the device TVM certificate info don't get fooled by the name attribute that's in there. And I have to add, I'm a total no in certificate topics. So maybe that's for others very obvious. But I then found out, hey, those numbers cannot be true. So I did a little bit more. And then we have an issue to, but we also have an issued from attribute. So when reusing this query, be careful. In this case, it didn't matter because in both issue to and issued from, the name was the same. And then I'm basically checking, if actually this certificate is present on that device. Good. Once being sure that I then dig deeper into those devices where the certificate wasn't there. And actually, for that, I have to go to the last query because I found out I can't trust the data really, because on some devices, there was no certificate info present at all, or just a few, which of course is a topic for itself. I found out some were related to outdated Defender agents or MDE agents whatsoever. Anyway, if you do such an analysis and if you tell your customers you should fix those devices, you don't want to send them, you don't want to cause unnecessary panic. So in this case, this gave a handful of devices where obviously the whole inventory, was useless because there was no certs at all. Now, why do devices don't have those certificates? In theory, these endpoints should have received them as part of the Windows update, unless you are deploying certificates in the old way via GPO, etc. But these were supposed to come down via the Windows update mechanism. So then I brought into the mix the missing knowledge base articles or missing knowledge bases, which we get from the device TVM, where do we have it, blah, 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 blah. Somewhere I go there, total missing KBs. Yeah, join kind KB, missing KB. Yeah, here we are. So here I first built this missing KB information, total. And here again, I could see a pattern. So some of those devices that were really missing those certificates were also those devices that were missing, security updates since a couple of months. So could be related. Good. That was my first script. Actually, without now switching back to the slides, that brought me into my other script that I've developed, and that was data collection script. Because while analyzing why some devices don't have their certificate info properly updated, I started digging into the Defender for Endpoint data collection scripts. Now, this has nothing to do with this new feature data, custom data collection, but it's related to the fact that for those that look a little bit under the hood, some of the inventory data that Defender for Endpoint is collecting is basically based on a number of PowerShell scripts that are somewhere deep in the system, deep by means of in this folder, which you can't access normally, but when you use PSExec and you connect a system, you get to those scripts. And in those scripts, as you can see, they just have all random names. Also, they do change from time to time. Actually, just last night, I noticed with Gianni while testing that some of the random GUIs have changed, but they're not changing like every day. So, because I have nothing else to do, I basically went through all those scripts and kind of tried to make sense of what those scripts are actually doing until I of course, found that script that does the certificate inventory, which was the very first one. So if this one is running, and then I found out that there was an error by enabling PowerShell verbose logging, that there seems to be an issue with properly executing this script, and that allowed me to reason over why do we have, again, some clients that didn't have the proper certificate info. But again, don't take these things for granted. But it was quite interesting to understand a little bit, in which intervals and how Microsoft Defender for Endpoint is actually doing some of this data collection behind the scenes. My last script is a simple one, but during an assessment, again, I've noticed, especially around Windows 10, 11, many companies have migrated. I noticed with a few customers that either they got blind spotted because they had properly configured RBAC, but they are called their device group Windows 10. And they didn't update their device group rules. So basically, as they started to migrate, they got fewer and fewer devices in their portal because they were not properly assigned to either a new group, which I would recommend, because then you can, in vulnerability management, easily switch the scope when it comes to outdated devices, especially in that time frame when you have a larger migration going on. You don't want to get distracted by vulnerability management telling you you now have 200 Windows 10 devices because they apparently have been migrated. But which some customers did, produce new computer names, you still have all those old Windows 10 devices in your system claiming that there are missing patches. So I wrote this quick query, and it was funny how many social reactions I got also directly, because apparently there's a lot of people out there that actually forgot to look at the proper device group assignments, in this case to take a look at their Windows 11. But of course you can use the scripting any way you want. Bottom line is you want to avoid that you have devices ending up all in the unassigned group, but have a proper environment and make sure that as much as possible devices are in a proper group if you care about device groups. Yeah. Good. That was it from my end, and I don't think I have anything else. No. So with that, we'll conclude the show today. Let me give you a little heads up on what's coming next. Let me double check. We'll have the next session on February 24th, where we have Michael Crane on the show. Exactly. And that will be, let me double check. Is that another day, right? Let me quickly check, because we had to do some slight changes to our schedule. No, 24th is still a Tuesday. And I believe then is it March where we are earlier? Let me double check.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something so with some summit somewhere.
No, it's also a Tuesday. Yeah. Okay. No, that's fine. Yeah, but in March it's a week earlier. So for those who are just waiting until this Tuesday, we have a slight change in the rhythm here, as Gianni and I are both abroad in the following week. Yeah. Okay. That's all for today. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you, Simon. It was a nice talk. Thank you very much.
Have a good rest of the week. Thanks, Simon. Thanks everybody for joining live.
Thank you, guys.
And see you next month. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.